Greetings, everyone. Welcome. Glad to be back again. We've had another one of those roller coaster kind of weeks here where things, a lot of getting used to our new environment, a lot of clearing out some of the deeper vestiges and remnants of things that we brought with us. But welcome this day, which is Wednesday, February 5th, 2020. To this edition of the North Prophecies. Now, this video is going to be in two parts because I have to preface the actual prophecy and vision that was given to me with this realization of what's going on. And the second part of it is about what's going to happen in order to fix it. So the first part that we're dealing with today, all of it has to do with the control matrix. And this is mostly, for this part, we're going to talk about where it comes from, how it works, what it looks like, what its purpose is, and all of that. We're going to look at that and how it's out picturing for us now. And the insanity that in our world that it's generating. So welcome, and let's get to it. So this is called the insanity of the Great Divide and why it keeps getting worse. This is something that I wrote this out because there was no way that I could remember all of this and everything I wanted to include it in it. So I will be reading what I wrote as we go through. So I was thinking recently about how divided we are, right? Who isn't? It's like, where is this coming from? Why is this so prevalent? Nothing happens in the physical world without something in other higher planes or states of being as the driving force. So I have spent a lifetime literally observing this and never ceased to be both fascinated and amazed by it. That's, I've always been able to see, the patterns and everything that's being woven and what's happening at higher levels that's driving what's going on here. It really is an amazing thing. That's my gift, and that's what I'm here to do and share with you and do for you, if that's what you so desire. But for now, we're going to concentrate on the global issues going on and how it's out picturing, and especially here in the United States. So why, for instance, I would look at myself and ask, would the liberals and progressives ally themselves with a terrorist regime or socialism or communism, the stripping away of our constitutional rights and many other extreme positions never before seen in the sheer volume and preponderance and continuous output and outflow of these stances that we're seeing now? We just, every time you think things couldn't get any more extreme, boom, something else comes along. And it's just adopted without question. It's like, okay, yes, this is what we're for. You're right. So what is really going on here? And then we combine this with the, with the never-ending political correctness, the weaponry of racism, sexism, fascism, white supremacy, xenophobia, all of this stuff that's constantly just thrown out there like treats to an eager crowd. It becomes curiouser and curiouser in the world, And it's like the world just turned upside down and inside out. What the heck is going on? Now, there are many of you who are probably getting disgruntled at my descriptions of this because you may be taking it personally. And I'm sorry about that, but I have to call it as I see it. Talk to God if you don't like it. And from my perspective, it's not that, and I'm not judging here, I'm seeing it as it is playing out. I'm calling a spade a spade. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying this is what is. And I've just been sort of looking at this and never really taking the time to go up and see, what's going on. And recently, for the first time, I did that and saw it for what it is. Quite simply, and the whole thing, is very simple once you get to, how you get those downloads and, you get like this bing and it takes you 20 pages to explain what you got in that millisecond. Well, that's kind of where we are now. So the concept and the mechanism is very simple. And while I focus on our liberal lefty folks, because that's that group is presenting the most in-your-face examples of this, it doesn't mean they're the only ones. No one and no group, down to the family unit, is immune from this disease of the 3D human condition. It's driven by tribal and survival culture. For eons, up from the caveman, right? We have all of these tribal rules and instincts and processes and behaviors and beliefs that we have brought with us into the modern day. And so nobody is immune from participating in this. At its core, this is the driving force here that's creating all of this, is the need to control our environment and everything in it, right? That's a survival instinct. If what we can control helps us to survive. But it has, we all engage in this. It's a learned mechanism to dispel fear, keep us safe, exert a measure of power over our lives. In the tribal culture, there's a hierarchy of power and control, granting the most to the person at the top, right? The elites. In the best tribal models, the power vested in the hierarchy is simply a measure of the level of responsibility that person has in the tribe. There's no personal attachment to it. It's just a job that you've been given. And it doesn't give you any more power over anybody else, because in those best tribal models, the model is circular, like the round table. No one person has any more power than anybody else around the table, just that one person is given the authority to make the final decisions that everybody around the table has said, gets to put in their stuff. And then there has to be one person that says, okay, I've heard it all. This is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to go. And without pulling any power from anybody, the people in that circle just give that person the right to make those decisions at that time. So when that leadership changes, it's a different person in the circle. It's, you know, that's coming into the circle to make those decisions. But what's happened is in the prevalent corrupted model, we have created, or has been created for us, whichever way you want to look at it. Part of the dark grid and cabal influence has definitely sponsored this corrupted model that we are currently experiencing and living within. And people do get attached to the power. Why is that? Well, because we have created a culture of victimhood, right? Everybody is made to be powerless. You got to depend on somebody else to do this. I can't do this. Somebody else has to do it. This is where things like a desire for more government to take care of things comes from. We could talk about that ad infinitum, but I won't go into that. I'm just saying this is where that kind of stuff comes from. We're helpless, we're powerlessness, so that you have to take care of things. And so what happens in this corrupted model is that the people at the top do get attached to that power, because instead of keeping the power flowing around the circle as the better and more functional positive tribal model works, the people in this corrupted model are the pyramid. Everybody at the bottom willingly gives power to the people at the top. And so the people at the top get attached to this power, get addicted to having this power, and all that it can bring to them. And they use it corruptly to bring things to them that aren't for the greater good necessarily of the rest of the pyramid, which is what they're supposed to be doing. Everything is supposed to be feeding the greater good and the needs of the entire structure. But once they get to the top of the power, the pyramid, and they're fed all of this power all of the time, well, then they desire it, they feed on it, they crave it, and they do whatever they can to keep getting this power. You know, this happens, and we're familiar with this in pretty much all areas of our lives. You know, we have the family, right? Mom, dad, and kids. And there's usually one parent in the household who tends to be the voice of authority. And most of the time that works out fine, but there are some households with people who have been extremely victimized or felt victims or powerless during their lives, who then overcompensate by trying to have power in the family. And that's where we get abusive situations. So similarly, we can see this happening. This exists, you know, in our jobs, employment, politics, finance, religion, education, and of course, government. So this is everywhere. But this is just how it works at the physical level of being. So people at the higher levels literally siphon power and energies from those below them at the lower levels of that pyramid. And the people at the lower levels of the pyramid give that power willingly, simply so that they, you know, the only thing they're getting enough to survive on, and somebody at the top is taking care of all of the rest, and they're willing to do that and to maintain that victimhood and powerlessness, because that's how they have come to expect things are supposed to operate. So And there's much more that goes into it. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible just because we have to move on to, in the next video, the next phase of this and why I even am bringing this to you. So what happens when people at the top siphon power and energies from those below them? They become spiritually separated from their own divine power because they're pulling it up through the pyramid and pulling it up from the earth, from Gaia. And they're using physical power, and they're cutting off their connection to divine source, because their motives and their desire for this power that they're bringing from other people cuts off that connection and their desire for it. I see this all the time, especially in people, and victims have that power cut off from them too. So they're just siphoning everything up. And so all of this, they're feeding on the power because everybody below them has been conditioned to accept the control, victimhood, powerlessness matrix as the way it's supposed to be. And there is a portion of people participating, portion of the psyche of people participating in this pyramid that actually is fearful of freedom and self-empowerment and independence and having to take care of stuff themselves instead of looking for other people to do it. They're afraid of not being powerless. How do we do this? What do we do? What does that mean? How will I survive if I'm not, if I'm out here by myself taking care of me? And they're fearful of this and fearful of having, not having others guide them and tell them what to do or what to think. They're afraid of rejection by the tribe, right? You can all understand that. We have all been there. Fear of rejection is like a huge fear that's used to control us because we want to be part of the tribe, right? We don't want to be pushed out of the tribe, sent out on our own, banished. We don't want that. And we're afraid of that. And that's used to keep us in the pyramid, in the structure. This has been operating for hundreds, thousands of years in various ways. But it has been doing so without the kind of division we see in our culture now. Now, you can say there is division between tribes, but we haven't seen this division within the tribe. All right, and we have to call the United States, citizens of this country, everyone who lives here, part of that tribe. And now we have this just divisiveness and this pushing against each other. And so what's going on with that? What changed? So first and foremost, the Great Awakening began. Now it's been going on slowly building up for decades, okay? But officially, the Great Awakening came into full swing as the major focus when all timelines merged on December 21st, 2012. After December 21st, 2012, the Great Awakening is the primary force here, and anything that interferes with that, it's not going to be tolerated, right? Not going to happen. So after that, as soon as the Great Awakening started, people began to see, they became aware that they were stuck in a control matrix. Things started to break down and come into our awareness. They started breaking free and taking charge of their own lives and futures. So you have to remember that back in 2008, just in this country, there was something upwards of 16 million people got put out of the workforce. Excuse me. When we had the Great Recession. 16 million people. And they were set free from corporate environments and other job situations. And most of them never went back. Well, why is that? Being set free, once they were free of that situation, and I have both myself, I was one of those people, and so many others that I talked to, once they got out of that environment, they literally, their souls literally would not let them get back in. Their souls were calling them to do other things and to find other ways to support themselves and their needs and to move higher into our spiritual awareness and our own personal awakenings. They learned self-determination in that process. They learned to start thinking for themselves, to start doing things differently for, that they could survive, and that, that everything didn't depend on that particular corporate job. Does it mean everything was easy? Heck no. All of us know that. Been there, done that. It was not a good time at all. So, but in the same vein, we learned more independence because, for one thing, we weren't surrounded and embedded in that corporate culture anymore, day in and day out. And that dropped away. That shedded away from us. And once we weren't embedded in that, we began to see other things, to become more aligned with our truth and what we know, and figure out who we are. As more, but see, here's what really happened. This is what the crux of the matter is. So as more and more of us broke out of the control matrix, those at the top of this pyramid starting noticing that their power base was shrinking, right? Everything that was feeding them power, that was diminishing. That was not a good thing. So how do you gain control of others? How do you get that power back? In this culture, the mechanism, the method, the weapon, the tool is to manipulate people through emotional trauma and fear. As long as you can create fear and emotional trauma and response in people, they're giving you their power. That's something you need to remember if you didn't realize that before. Anytime that you as somebody is doing something that's causing fear, you're giving them your power. Anytime you're angry with somebody, you are giving them your power. Anger is another form of fear. So as soon as you are giving them your power, then they're satisfied. They're like, yes, okay, better. And they can control you and make you do what they want you to do through using this emotional hook and the fear, and creating anger, and even using your heartstrings. Oh, what about the poor person? What about, the poor animal? It's horrible that these people are persecuted for X, Y, and Z. And while some of that may be true, a lot of it is used to help support things that are, again, on these extreme ends, simply because we have to go through those. They had to go to those extremes in order to keep creating the emotional output the loosh energies. See, because the people at the top of the pyramids have been developed an energy systems that became dependent on these energies. This flow of power, fear energy, and powerlessness, and lack of control, and victimhood, feeding on all of those energies. It wasn't just power, it was just feeding on all of those negative energies. They become dependent on that, literally, for survival. So what happened? We have 2012 coming in, all of this, the falling apart has happened, and we have the awakening coming and the opening of awareness coming to be, our eyes opening, our senses opening, our seeing around us and saying, wait a minute, this is not right. Something has to be done. But those people were in a vast minority, but they kept growing, and the base of those pyramid structures kept disintegrating. And so as the base disintegrates, as fewer and fewer people are supporting that base, that structure, then they had to keep upping the ante because they couldn't get people back. We'll talk about why in a minute. So they had to keep upping the emotional output and energy and fear energy and everything that they desired. They had to get more and more out of the base that was left. Reminds me of when I was working at a golf course. I took over as the food service manager. And most golf courses, it was a private golf course, and they're all based on memberships. And the vast majority of the members are retired people who are paying their membership fee every year. And because they're retired and they were on fixed incomes, they're watching every dime. Didn't mean they weren't comfortable in their finances, but they were still conscious of where it was going. And they were making sure that they got value for their expenses. Whatever they spent, they had to get value back for it in return. But my boss's philosophy, and I've seen this over and over again in many businesses, was that as soon as business started diminishing, his first response was raise the prices. So the same hot dog that they were paying 75 cents for last year was now 95 cents. Now you might not think, 20 cents is a big deal, but for these guys, it is a big deal. If they're going through and they're looking for a hot dog and they have budgeted X amount of money, they eat a couple of hot dogs a day, so maybe that's 40 cents more they're spending when they come out to play golf. You say, geez, 40 cents? To us, that doesn't seem like a lot, but it was the principle of the thing. They were getting the same item, which to them had the same value, and being asked to give more money for it. So to give you an idea of how it, when I came in and I looked at this, I basically changed the game. So I upped the price from 95 cents to a $1.50, I think I did, or $1.75 for a hot dog. But it wasn't just a hot dog. It was a hot dog in a boat, and it had a dill pickle, and it had chips with it. And they were thrilled to death. And we made a fortune because we added more value. But in these pyramids, the power structures, they don't think like that. They're thinking about just keeping the flow going to them. And in many of these power structures that we have, that flow, money is part of that flow, right? The flow comes up to them. Money is that energy that provides them with what they want. So we have after 2012, so what happened as we look at things starting to fall apart? Or the Great Awakening to really get into mainstream awareness. So what happened in 2014? It stoked national flames of racism that are still seated in the energies of this country. They're fading. They're being overridden, but they're fading. But at that time, it was awful. I mean, it just, you might have thought the whole country was like up in flames almost. That was the whole feeling of it. And when it was falsely and knowingly, all right, when these reports were made, it was known by those who were pushing the narrative that it was false, that reported that a cop had shot an unarmed, innocent black man in Ferguson, Missouri. Y'all remember that. I know you do, and how awful it was. The Obama administration deliberately set that fire and continued to add fuel to it until the federal investigation and courts confirmed that the pushed racist narrative was totally fabricated. There was nothing to it, never had been. But that didn't do anything for all the people that have been harmed and all of the businesses that have been destroyed in the riots that ensued and the racist hatred that was generated. Why the heck was that done? Go back to emotional trauma and fear. Look at the manipulation. Look at how that enabled the people at the top to just make blanket statements and say, this is why, and this is that. And the people in those states are ready to just go, yes, you know? And it's not their fault. Don't get me wrong. You know, this is what happened, like it or not. And so these riots should never have happened. They were horrible. And one of the outcomes was the word racist became an emotionally charged buzzword used to fire up people of color and keep them controlled in victimhood and feeding the control matrix power grid. It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. But it was a total knee-jerk reaction at that time. And that reaction had been programmed and was used purposefully. So then we have Baltimore, same scenario. I live 26 miles from Baltimore. The energy in the upper levels that was coming from that was horrible. The dark energy, the dark vortexes, the entities, everything that came in to feed on that, right? Because that was also in Ferguson. Make no doubt about it, all right? That was also feeding those flames. The dark forces are real, people, and they were feeding and fanning those flames because they were feeding on them. So we have Baltimore, same thing happens. False narrative. Somewhere in that time frame, was it 2013 maybe before that, we have Benghazi. 4 Americans were brutally killed and murdered. The ambassador was tortured and abused before he was murdered. No help came. And before anybody could even say anything else right away, they're blaming Benghazi on some poor schmuck who put out a video on YouTube. Come on. The Arabs aren't watching YouTube over in Libya. They're too busy blowing up stuff over there, you know, at least at that time. Nothing against Arabs. They had a whole faction and all it was being used at that time. And so here we have another egregious lie right? And by that time, we all looked at that and said, oh yeah, right. I don't think so. And we were starting to be willing to be more questioning. You know, the veil of lies was starting to break through and disintegrate. And we were starting to see that this was a bunch of baloney. And, you know, they actually expected us to believe the whole thing about the video, right? Some video that some poor guy put up on Facebook or YouTube incited this wanton killing spree. That doesn't explain how come these people never got any help, right? Okay, we won't get into it, but we all know the Benghazi story. Over and over and over again, these triggers are set. And now in our current environment, the narratives are sent and distributed to the media and then distributed by the media, right? The media have been made the enforcers of the control matrix, pushing the buttons they're directed to push, participating in the deceit and the lies and the half-truths. To move people in certain directions, to control you, right? To create the fear and the outrage, the indignation, and, you know, the emotional connection. And as soon as they create the emotional connection, then they're giving you the story that tells you, okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to think. This is what's causing it. Boy. So we have had to start, and it doesn't matter, you know, all of the media, and we're talking about print and TV and movies and radio and all of that. All of those companies in the world, what we call the mainstream media, MSM, all of them, hundreds in the entire world, are controlled by only 6 companies, which control what is and isn't allowed to be shown or made known through their networks. We have to wake up to that. That's part of the control matrix, is the controlling of information. So while all of this is happening, we have an election cycle. And then Trump appears. All the other candidates that were up there at that time, there were 17 Republican candidates and 3 Democratic candidates. All the other candidates, except for Dr. Ben Carson, who is one of the most gentle, kind, wonderful, loving, most insanely intelligent people there ever were. He just wasn't, you know, they would have eaten him up and spit him out in the Oval Office. But he's doing wonderful work where he is. But all of the rest of them were cut from the same control matrix tribal grid. They all played the game the same way because they were after the power and all that it could give to them in the physical plane, right? Because that's where they're stuck, is in the physical plane. They don't understand how much they could have if they learn to grow into their own power and their own divine self and divine connection, and how much they could have simply by doing that. But so here comes Trump, and everybody else all plays the game the same way. They, you know, they move in the same circles. They know how it's got to be done. They speak the same double speak. They couch things in terms, you know, that most people are just going to make assumptions about what they mean. And they lie. They tell people exactly what the people want to hear. So when you want to hear something and somebody says it, you automatically are aligned with that and you think it's truth. Then comes Trump. He was totally outside the grid, could not be controlled or contained. He ignited a massive awakening. And I know there are those of you listening to this that are going to say, are you serious? You're off your rocker. Sorry. If you were looking at it from the higher levels and saw what was going on, you would have seen it. Massive awakening, which was further eroding the power base. Oh my God, they couldn't have that. The way it's always been done, and keeping all of the uppity higher mucky mucks elites in power with the big bucks coming to them and all the perks, playing the game. And the game was never about serving the people that were below them in the pyramid, right? We said this already. They were never about serving the people in the bottom of the pyramid, just enough to, keep them alive, surviving, so that they could, keep providing power, doing all of the work and sending it all upward. God forbid anything should disrupt that at any level, whether it's a corporation or whether it's a religion. And we've got plenty of that coming into disarray as well, because people are waking up in the religious institutions and looking around and saying, wait a minute, this can't be, especially where it comes to the human trafficking and the pedophilia going on. This is all part of this same picture. It isn't just politics. It's just what I'm using as the example. So the power base was being eroded here, and they used the same tactics on Trump that had worked before: racism, sexism, bigotry, xenophobia, everything else they could throw at him to inflame the power base, right? That base, and try to turn his followers away from him. Or I'll say supporters. I don't like followers, because that's not where we're at here with this. The supporters away from him. What they didn't realize, all right, and you need to understand this, and this is in any organization where the light is shining and things are falling apart and the people are waking up. You can't get back control for these people. You can't control them. What they didn't realize is that the awakened individual is immune to that kind of manipulation. They're thinking for themselves. They're being able to, their intuition and their ability to sense that they're being had, deceived, lied to, taken for a ride, not told the whole story anymore. These people are immediately looking for more information, looking for backup, looking to say, let's see the real story here. What's really going on? And finding it. They're finding information for themselves, and they're finding out that they've been lied to, or they're being deceived by being told half-truths, that they aren't being shown the whole picture. Things are deliberately being kept from them. People are seeing that now. They're starting to look that way because they're awakened. The higher and upper parts of them, their spirit and divine self, are connecting with them, and our divine selves have a 360-degree view here, all right? And we can see when something isn't kosher, when it isn't representing truth. So then we have another way, we have the Kavanaugh circus, preying on the wounded divine feminine to trigger ancestral traumatic wounds. And that's what that was. that was all just a show. It was a play. It was a big production that was meant to trigger the wounded divine feminine in every woman and every man who has, who has inherited that from past life, to trigger that in every woman across the country and some across the globe, because those were deep wounds. They needed to come up. See, that was part of the divine plan. That needed to come up. And ever since that came up, a lot of the worst of that was released at that time. But nonetheless, it was being purposefully used to create that situation that occurred during the Kavanaugh hearings and confirmation. Do you see the pattern now? Are you starting to see how this works? If the control matrix is threatened, if the status quo that keeps them in power, in control, keeping them fed, money, power, all of that, if that's threatened, boom, they're going to bring out something else. All of the false flags that we're seeing. And we won't go into explaining false flags. If you don't know what it is, look it up, please. But all of that is all efforts to both distract and to inflame the base that remains of these power structures. So the current state of divisiveness and political insanity is a direct result of the increasingly bizarre means of whipping up the base to keep control and power. And the other part, and there's it just gets more and more bizarre. This is a dying proposition. And the ascension process of the Great Awakening is both exposing these deep levels of deceit and control, while at the same time collapsing the matrix. Once that is gone, the divisions can be seen for the illusions they are and begin healing. When we stop seeing people as separate individuals, as egos, right, as their ego identity with all of their wounds and fears and everything, if we stop seeing them that way, the illusions break down and we start seeing people from a soul level, the healing can begin and we can come back together. We can unify. But it's going to take a big event to do that. And I'm going to share what the angels showed me, the vision that I was given about how that's going to happen in the next part of this video. There was, and I was just watching yesterday, a video of Vedic astrology talking about how the planetary alignments are coming back now into the same alignments they were in February. They're coming back into the same alignments they were for 9/11. Now, this astrologer was talking about how she was predicting that there may be another catastrophic event coming. And I'm thinking, well, we've got coronavirus out there. That's pretty catastrophic already. We've got swarms of locusts, the likes which have never been seen, eating all the crops in Africa. We've still got the remnants of the bushfires in Australia and the 500 million animals that were burned to death and fired, and injured and killed in that. We have, so much that is already here that you would call pretty tragic. But what I have been getting, and I was looking at it this morning, is not that 9/11 was an explosion. And it was an explosion not just in the buildings, but it was an explosion of letting so many dark and destructive things and patterns out into the world that has put us on this path that we have been on for the past 19 years. The reduction of individual freedoms, right? We had the Patriot Act. Now government can spy on us without, us knowing about it, and really without true legal permission, right? Used to, when we wanted to do a phone tap or a line tap or something on somebody, you had to go to court. You had to get permission. Well, now we go to FISA court. Yeah, they get permission to do one person. But that now has been expanded. So it isn't just that person. It's everybody that person talks to, and everybody they talk to, and everybody they talk to. They go 3 hops away. So when you think that everybody in this world is, we are each only 6 degrees of separation from each other, you're talking about an awful lot of people being spied on that have nothing to do with the person that they say that they're targeting. And we'll just kind of leave that there. But we do have a really strong control issue in this country. It's breaking down. It's going to take a lot to solve it. And like I said, 9/11 was an explosion. And I see what's happening now lining up to be an implosion, where all that was created as a result of 9/11 is now being uncreated, collapsing, and being exposed for what it truly was. And that's what I see coming. And it's going to take a lot for that to happen. I can't say it's going to be pretty, but we'll talk about that in the next part of this video. So let's sign off now. This is part 1 of the control matrix, and we will, and breaking free of it is going to be the next part. So thank you so much for being here. See you in part 2.